Let's play a game. Let's pretend for a moment. You own an apartment building, and I want to rent from you. I have a steady job, I make a good salary, and have a good credit history. Would you rent your place to me? How about now? Do you still like me, or have your opinions changed? What if I have an accent? Or a last name that sounds foreign? What if I have a disability? What if I'm a single parent? Would you steer me away? Would you close the door? Would you?
The Fair Housing Act protects your right to live where you want, no matter what your race, color, national origin, sex, religion, disability, or family status. If you think you've been discriminated against, call us. Fair housing. It's not an option. It's the law.
So in the first instance, what we have are examples of linguistic profiling, discrimination based on the sound of your voice, presumably sight unseen. In the second instance, we have instances of racial profiling where it's the visual characteristics of the individual, not the voice, that's the basis of discrimination. Now in this particular editorial cartoon, which was produced after Hurricane Katrina, I asked some of my students if they could make reference to the passengers on the bus who were above the waterline in contrast to those below the waterline without explicit reference to their race. Does anybody want to take a shot at that? How might you refer to the people above the waterline or the people below the waterline without explicitly referring to their race? I was in a school of education for years, so I've learned a little bit about wait time. So I'm not just going to jump right in. I'll let you ponder this for a second. You know, it's easy if you do it based on race, right? You know, everybody above the waterline is white, everybody below the waterline is black. But is there a way to refer to them without explicit reference to race? Everyone below the waterline might likely retrace their ancestry to someone who was once enslaved in the United States. Being black doesn't necessarily mean that you retrace your ancestry to anybody that was enslaved, and in fact the first African American president is not a slave descendant. All right? So even though we have our first African American president, we have yet to have our first slave descendant president. And that cultural distinction is an important one when I look at many of the policy issues related to the work that I do. And in the context of Arizona, even though this is a black-white situation, when you're thinking about matters of diversity, the circumstances affecting Latinos right now are really quite extraordinary when looked at in contrast to the demographic diversity of other groups. All right? Now, how many of you in the room are linguists? Okay. I was William LaBeouf's first African-American student. And William LaBeouf, as a sociolinguist, is highly regarded and very well known for the work that he did in the 1960s on the social stratification of English in New York City, which included a massive study of African-Americans and Puerto Ricans. And back then in the 1960s, he referred to non-standard Negro English before they then began work in the 70s on black English, and today we use the term African-American vernacular English in addition to the term Ebonics, which so many of other people have heard. The linguistic legacy that affected slave descendants differs substantially from that of people who immigrated to this country and could do so maintaining the coherent heritage languages that they brought with them from their mother country. So one of the things that LaBeouvians try to do is to see what we can measure concretely, right? That doesn't mean that you have a comprehensive picture of everything that's going on, but rather that there are certain characteristics that lend themselves to very precise measurement without a great deal of difficulty. Take the top line, sex, right? Now, men and women, okay? You know what classification you fit into. chances are that everybody else does. Yep, there are the special occasions of transsector and transgender, and in fact, I was at a conference at Mary Buckholz's University in California, Santa Barbara, where I did my famous experiment where I manipulated my dialect. This was my housing discrimination studies, which we're going to get into, where I call around and I'd say, hello, I'm calling about the apartment you have advertised in the paper, but I would modify my speech on another occasion. I'll call back and I'll say, hello, I'm calling about the apartment you have advertised in the paper. And in another circumstance, I modify one more time and say, hello, I'm calling about the apartment you have advertised in the paper. Okay? And part of that intonation, which came out horribly in my spontaneous attempt here, was because when I did grow up in LA and then out in the Valley, I had exposure to a lot of these different dialects and began to manipulate them as a child on the schoolyard. So that kind of linguistic dexterity that I possessed was different than that of many of my peers, either in the inner city or out in the suburbs. And John Ogbu talked about the category where I have family heritage as to whether or not you retrace your ancestry to those who were, I thought I had 45 minutes. You all cut 15 minutes from my day. I went there for 13 minutes. You told, they dished you up here with a 15-minute cut on my thing and nobody told me, okay. So I will talk faster now. I'm going to zip through much more of this. But this demographic diversity index, in Ogbu's category on voluntary immigrants versus involuntary immigrant versus Native American, John Ogbu's work, John Ogbu is no longer with us, but he was professor of anthropology at UC Berkeley. And he came here from Nigeria with a very compelling story. And he made some important personal discoveries as part of his journey that led to his particular model looking at caste-like minorities within the United States.